But also, I think the American people have a right to know why so much misinformation was spread about COVID-19 in this country by President Trump. Let me just read some of the greatest hits from President Trump. China's been working very hard to contain the coronavirus. The United States greatly appreciates their efforts and transparency. It will all work out well. In particular, on behalf of the American people, I want to thank President Xi. Okay. I just spoke to President Xi last night. And you know, we're working on the problem, the virus. It's a very tough situation. I think he's going to handle it. I think it's handled very well. We're helping wherever we can. Just had a long conversation with the president of China. He's strong, sharp, powerful, focused on leading the counterattack to the coronavirus. He feels they're doing very well, even building hospitals in a matter of days. Great discipline in taking place in China. President leads strongly in a very successful operation. We're working closely with China to help. I think China is very, professionally run in a sense. They've got everything under control. I really believe they're going to have it under control very soon. In April, supposedly it's going to die with the hotter weather, and that's a beautiful date to look forward to. But China, I can tell you, is working very hard. We have very few people in this country with COVID, and you know what? They're getting better. They're all getting better. I think the whole situation will work out well. We pretty much shut it down coming from China. We only have 15 people with COVID. And, 15 within a couple of days, it's going to go down to 0. That's a pretty good job we've done. It's going to go away, hopefully at the end of the month, and if not, hopefully soon after that. I could keep going. This goes on, and every day it goes on, there were more and more cases in this country. And so we have to find out why the president was spreading that information.
This is Jared Moskowitz reminding his Republican colleagues, who traffic pretty openly in revisionist history, that their leader, Donald Trump, is not some hero when it comes to COVID. And this is all part of some long-term strategy by Republicans to somehow declare victory when it comes to the pandemic in order to justify their own incompetence in addressing the virus once it came to the U.S. And their efforts were redoubled once the Energy Department assessed that the cause of the pandemic was, quote, most likely a leak from a lab in Wuhan. Now, I should note, too, that 4 other agencies still judge the pandemic as likely being the result of natural transmission. 2 agencies beyond that are undecided, all of which is to say no one really has any definitive answers about the origins of COVID. But regardless of where it came from, let's not pretend that Donald Trump or his Republican colleagues were on any planet adept at addressing it. In fact, Trump only decided to pivot to blaming China once it became clear that he had a massive problem on his hands that he didn't anticipate. But as Moskowitz alluded to here, among the biggest cheerleaders for China during his presidency was Donald Trump. That's right, the strongman who regularly demonizes China was so deferential to that country when it mattered that he blindly accepted their propaganda on COVID's containment. And so as a result, Trump didn't bother with any national testing and contact tracing plan, with any national masking plan, with any national mitigation plan, although he did spend time cosplaying as a TV doctor and suggesting injecting bleach into your arms. He wanted TV time, he wanted attention. And all of this was so poorly executed that under his watch, we had 20% of the world's COVID cases and deaths, despite having only 5% of the world's population. So if you're wondering why Republicans and Trump apologists are so desperate to rewrite history here, that's why. And by the way, that was a point that Jamie Raskin summed up perfectly in our recent interview. The Department of Energy has said that it's likely that COVID was leaked from a lab in Wuhan. Still, 4 other agencies say that it was the result of natural transmission. But regardless of, the fact is that we don't know what the answer is as of this point. But still, Republicans have seized on this as if it's some win for them. Notwithstanding the fact that we still don't have that definitive answer, can you explain how Republicans would perceive anything COVID-related as a victory?
Well, if I can reconstruct the contortions in their thinking, they recognize that everybody rightfully blames Donald Trump for America's catastrophically negligent response to COVID-19. I mean, he was a guy who was in complete denial for weeks about it, and then, began pointing fingers immediately, and then told everybody to take hydroxychloroquine, or everybody tried bleach, or, and so people generally understand that Trump was the source of the failure of the country to have a plan actually to defeat the disease, and we've lost more than 1 million people. So they think, well, if we can show that that China was at fault, not by some natural transmission from animals to humans, but rather by the leak from a lab, or in the more extreme cases, although I don't think there's any evidence for this, but there's some evidence for the idea of a lab leak. But if there were a deliberate bio assault, by China, then nobody would blame Donald Trump and his administration anymore. Everybody would blame China. The problem with that, as I've been trying to point out, is that we have now identified 36 different episodes, either on Twitter or verbally or written, when Donald Trump aggressively defends and praises the performance of his friend, President Xi, and the Chinese Communist Party and the Chinese government, beginning in January, saying they're doing a great job, they're doing an excellent job, they're on top of it, we're in constant touch, they're being extremely transparent, they're showing us everything. This went on and on and on. And part of that is just his, natural fawning adulation for autocrats and dictators. And part of it is he just wanted to say, oh, well, we don't have to do anything. We're relying on China. So then it's a very odd turn of events to have people say, no, this was a leak from China. Let's blame China instead of Trump. That this just deepens Trump's complicity with it. Because if China pulled the wool over his eyes and he's telling everybody they're being perfectly transparent and they're working together, that just makes Trump's culpability worse.
And beyond that, I'm sorry, but I'm not sure how Republicans point to anything COVID-related as a win. Remember, prior to vaccine availability, the excess death rate among Democrats and Republicans was roughly even. But once we were in the post-vaccine period, the excess death rate for Republicans was about 76% higher than for Democrats. How Republicans can look at the hundreds of thousands of people who died due to some misguided partisan allegiance and still claim victory on anything related to this pandemic really does put their delusion on full display. These Republican officials should be apologizing to the families of the victims, not taking some stupid victory lap because they may be able to pin the blame for the virus's origin on a lab. And yet that's their priority, scoring a political win no matter how many lives it cost. But despite all of this, the GOP's positions here really are indicative of a larger problem on the right, and that is that they operate within their own hermetically sealed ecosystem, devoid of any facts. And so even though people like Jared Moskowitz and Jamie Raskin will make these very clear and obvious points repeatedly, Republicans still think that they scored some win because they get to shout out the Mad Libs that make up their talking points, like lab leak. But it's not actually about reality, hell, it's not even about American lives, it's about feeding their audience a narrative, and giving their supporters permission to feel like they've somehow won in a situation where over 1 million Americans have died. All of which is proof that when it comes to the GOP, dead Americans are apparently a price that they are willing to pay so long as they can congratulate themselves on some cheap political win. So good on Jared Moskowitz for wading through the Republican distractions and putting back into perspective the fact that Donald Trump was responsible for his own handling of this virus. And for putting into perspective also the consequences of an administration that was very clearly more concerned with pretending that everything was fine versus actually seeking substantive solutions. Republicans may be hoping that they can rewrite history with time, but that's not going to happen. They didn't have the spine to do what was right back then, so they don't get to pretend that they did right now. Before you go, a quick announcement. I've started a Spanish YouTube channel. Democrats desperately need to be able to appeal to Spanish-speaking audiences, so this is me doing my part. To help that channel get going in the algorithm so that we can finally start spreading our progressive message and breaking the conservative stranglehold on Spanish-speaking media, please subscribe and watch a few videos. The link to that channel, called Brian Tyler Cohen Espanol, is right here on this screen. And of course, to see more of my content in English, make sure to subscribe to this channel as well. The link is also right here on this screen. Thanks so much for watching.